Good afternoon, Madam Chair and fellow panelists. Thank you for the opportunity to present at the public hearings. Cheryl Grace is with me today to assist in finding slides in my paper slide submission in case questions arise. I will not be using a slideshow in my presentation. My name is Ellen Dailey, and I admit my testimony as a physician, a ratepayer in Saugeen Shores, and as a citizen of the United States. By way of background, I have been summering in Southampton all of my life. My family ties to the area go back to the 1930s. My husband and I have owned property in Southampton, now Saugeen Shores, for close to 25 years. I talk so much about the area that many of my friends at home believe I'm Canadian. In fact, I am not, but rather was born, raised, and have my permanent home in Erie, Pennsylvania, another Great Lakes community located next to our shared waters. I am board certified in obstetrics and gynecology by the American Board of Obstetrics and Gynecology, and am a fellow in the American College of Obstetricians and Gynecologists. I continue in active practice of my specialty and serve as chair for the Department of Obstetrics and Gynecology at the University of Pittsburgh Medical Center, Hammond. As chair, in addition to other duties, I evaluate and review departmental perinatal morbidity and mortality statistics. I am not a statistician and rely on others to provide me with the statistical validity of our data, as statistical confidence is important in data analysis. In my group practice, we participate in phase 3 clinical drug trials. As such, I am familiar with the higher bar for informed consent appropriate for experimental studies that ensures participants are informed of the potential risks as well as benefits in experimental studies. I do not profess to be an expert in radiological issues, but I understand and respect the use of diagnostic and therapeutic radiation. I order mammograms, CT scans, and other radiologic tests on my patients, and am reminded on an almost weekly basis of the exacting standards of consent required by our radiation department when doing studies on pregnant or potentially pregnant patients. My testimony this afternoon will review the potential impact of the proposed DGR on human health conditions, focusing on the effects of ionizing radiation, as well as the need for informed consent for a project of this scope. There are two significant flaws in OPG's health submission that I will address today: the consent process and inadequacies in the health data. The efficacy and safety of a DGR is unproven, though the known dangers of some of the radioactive waste to be stored in the proposed repository will last essentially forever. The permanence of any health risk associated with the DGR, coupled with the uncertainty about the spectrum of impact, amplifies the significance of even the very slightest concerns or available evidence. Any number greater than 0 multiplied by a number approaching infinity is a significant, if not enormous, number. Subtle ongoing biologic impacts may become pronounced and irreversible over time. The insidiousness of radiation injury, as in other forms of oncogenesis, is seen in propensity to present only after irreversible genetic damage has already occurred, occultly, over an unknown period of time. Given the unproven safety, the physical size, and the prospective timescale of the anticipated duration of the proposed DGR project, the ethical bar for safeguarding human and environmental health requires a different framework than that applied to situations of known and quantifiable risk. Risk can be defined as an event whose likelihood can be empirically confirmed. Uncertainty, however, cannot be expressed in terms of probabilities because of unknown and unknowable variables. The DGR for long-term storage of low and intermediate radioactive waste is essentially an untested hypothesis that can be stated as follows. Low and intermediate level radioactive waste can be safely stored underground indefinitely. This hypothesis, if tested, potentially exposes the public to known and unknown health risks. Therefore, the DGR project can be conceptualized as a large-scale, open-ended, human biologic and socioeconomic experiment or clinical trial. And as such, the project requires consent, not mere consultation, from those potentially affected by the proposal. Although the ethical and legal principles applying to consent for medical treatment, human experimentation, and public health initiatives have discrete differences, there are general areas of consensus among these that could be appropriately applied to the public's decision to give approval for the construction of the DGR, given the potential health impacts. There is broad consensus supporting an individual's right to informed consent. This consent requires the following components: legal competency, full disclosure of potential risks and benefits, evidence of understanding of the risks by the participant, voluntariness, and confirmation of consent. It is an ongoing process and not just a single act. The precedent to support the legitimacy for community consent is more recent. Free, prior, and informed consent, FPIC, is the principle that a community has the right to give or withhold its consent to proposed projects that may affect the lands it customarily owns, occupies, or otherwise uses. Although FPIC is a key principle in international law and jurisprudence related to Indigenous peoples, it has been proposed to apply to non-Indigenous communities as well. And in fact, FPIC is a requirement of the lending arm of the World Bank for large environmental projects. The case for FPIC is based on the right to meaningful participation in environmental decision-making, the right to control access to their lands and resources, contemporary standards of public participation as a hallmark of legitimate governance, and basic principles of equity and justice. In order to determine if OPG's public education material contained adequate information for a competent person and the community to make an informed decision, the project's equivalent of informed consent, regarding the human health aspect of the project, I looked at the information booklets and other educational materials OPG provided in Volume 2.2 of the EIS. According to the document, these are representative of the information that was available to the public at OPG's open houses, community event booths, the mobile DGR van, and in newsletters. While reviewing this information, it is important to keep in mind that how the information is framed is important to evaluate the presence of intentional or unconscious bias. My review of OPG's educational materials found the following descriptions for radioactive waste. Low-level waste consists of mops, rags, paper towels, and so forth that do not need any special protection. Intermediate level waste requires shielding during handling and includes ion exchange resins, filters, and irradiated core components. Refurbishment waste is low and intermediate waste from the refurbishment of reactors. It can be safely managed in shielded containers inside a concrete waste storage facility. From the OPG DGR website, I learned that low and intermediate level wastes are products and components used in the reactor building that may have collected some radiation during use. Mayor Smith of Saugeen Shores referred to nuclear waste in a 2012 letter to the public about the APM process as the byproduct of electricity generation from the nuclear fuel cycle. These descriptions don't give the public any idea of the nuclides that are within the waste, nor how long they last, or how dangerous they might be. None of these documents say this waste emits ionizing radiation. To learn more, I checked the technical support document on waste inventory and found 4 pages of nuclides listed for the inventory in 2018 and 4 more pages listed for 2062. Given the innocuous sounding descriptions in the educational materials, I was surprised at the number of nuclides within with very long half-lives, and those the public would recognize as being dangerous, such as uranium and plutonium. Why did OPG leave the full inventory out of the public education documents? Was it deliberate or an oversight? Were they afraid that if the public knew that plutonium, uranium, radioactive iodine will be in the repository, they would categorically say no? Why don't they clearly say that nuclear waste releases ionizing radiation that can be harmful to health? Why don't they clearly disclose that some of the intermediate level waste will remain radiotoxic for hundreds of thousands of years? Next, I looked at the websites of the CNSC and Health Canada to determine what these federal agencies say about ionizing radiation. I found lengthy and informative information about radioisotopes, radioactivity, and the biologic effects of ionizing radiation. These infodocs, as Dr. Thompson referred to them a few days ago in these hearings, describe these subjects in easy-to-understand language. The website documents discussed alpha, beta, and gamma decay, as well as a description of how radioactivity is measured. The CNSC website also lists examples of alpha, beta, and gamma emitters, such as uranium-238, tritium, and cobalt-60. When I checked the OBG technical documents, I found examples of all these emitters in the inventory lists for the proposed DGR. Both websites advise that ionizing radiation affects living tissue at the cell level by breaking chemical bonds and altering the structure of the DNA molecule. This causes one of three things to happen. The cell dies, it undergoes mutation, or it repairs itself if the damage is not too great. What does OPG say about biologic effects of radiation exposure? Very little. My review of the Keeping You Informed booklets and OPG neighbors newsletters revealed essentially no discussions of these possible effects. As an example of this, I refer you to the table of contents from one of the Keeping You Informed booklets. There are no chapters titled Health Risks, Potential Risks of Radiation Exposure, or Biologic Effects of Radiation Exposure. There are, however, chapters titled Radiation Safety Background, Preliminary Safety Assessment, Evaluating DGR Safety, and Interim Safety Assessment Results. The word safety suggests there are no potential risks. Again, framing of information is a vulnerable point in the consent process as it can introduce bias. So, what are the potential risks of ionizing radiation to human health? According to the CNSC, World Health Organization, and the American Cancer Society, exposure to ionizing radiation carries health risks. These risks include cancer, hereditary effects, cataracts, cardiovascular disease and stroke, immune effects, premature aging, radiation sickness, and death. Cancer risk data is based on studies of survivors of the 1945 atomic bombings in Japan, as well as evidence from studies on occupational workers, people exposed to radon, and victims of the Chernobyl nuclear accident. Additional information has been obtained from studies of recipients of selected diagnostic or therapeutic medical procedures. While most of the information regarding cancer is related to high and medium dose exposure, the BEER 7 2006 and the UNSCEAR 2010 reports state that exposure to low levels of radiation might also increase cancer rates. According to the BEER 7 report, and I quote, "The BEER 7 committee concludes that current scientific evidence is consistent with the hypothesis that there is a linear dose-response relationship between exposure to ionizing radiation and the development of radiation-induced solid cancers in humans. The committee further judges it is unlikely that a threshold exists for the induction of cancers, but notes that the occurrence of radiation-induced cancers at low doses will be small. The committee maintains that other health effects, such as heart disease and stroke, occur at high radiation doses, but additional data must be gathered before an assessment can be made of any possible connection between low doses of radiation and non-cancer health effects," end quote. Cancers associated with high-dose exposure include leukemia, multiple myeloma, breast, bladder, colon, liver, lung, esophageal, ovarian, stomach, and thyroid cancers. Literature from the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services also suggests a possible association for radiation exposure and prostatic, sinus, pharyngeal, and pancreatic cancers. Skin cancer is also associated with radiation exposure. It is important to keep in mind that ionizing radiation increases the risk of certain types of cancer more than others. Leukemia, a type of cancer that arises in the bone marrow, and thyroid cancer are among the most common radiation-induced cancers. The reason for this may be sensitivity of the cell line or the cell's propensity for uptake of a given radioactive element. The thyroid gland normally takes up iodine, bone takes up strontium. Each of these elements has a radioactive isotope produced by nuclear fission. According to the Canadian Cancer Statistics 2013 report, the incidence rates of thyroid cancer is the most rapidly increasing incidence rate among all major cancers. There was a 6.8% per year increase in males since 1998 and a 7% per year increase in females since 2002. The hereditary effects of ionizing radiation include congenital malformation, cognitive impairment, microcephaly, growth restriction of the fetus, prematurity, infertility, and pregnancy loss, including miscarriage, fetal death, neonatal death, and infant death. Animal studies, such as those conducted on fruit flies by Herman J. Mueller in 1926, showed that radiation will cause genetic mutations. However, to date, there have been no known genetic effects in humans caused by radiation. In spite of this, the Beer 7 report on the hereditary effects of exposure to low-level radiation concludes, quote, although adverse health effects in children of exposed parents attributable to radiation-induced mutations have not been found, there are extensive data on radiation-induced transmissible mutations in mice and other organisms. Thus, there is no reason to believe that humans would be immune to this sort of harm. I reviewed the OPG public educational materials for information about the health risk of exposure to ionizing radiation, such as that found on the websites previously mentioned. The Keeping You Informed booklets, OPG neighbors newsletters, and publicity brochures did not identify any of the potential risks previously identified. I checked the OPG DGR website and entered the online repository, scrolling 600 meters deep to the end of the report. I reviewed the website content, including the DGR newsletters, the DGR overview brochure, and the DGR overview video that were included in the online DGR. There are no discussions of health risks in these sections. In case the public was confused about who is the proponent, I also checked the NWMO website. After an exhaustive search and in the APM documents, I found the following health fact sheet. It states, quote, normally, the human body withstands the radioactivity encountered in our daily lives because natural processes allow us to repair damaged tissue. However, if living tissue absorbs ionizing radiation, changes can occur at the atomic level. Exposure over the long term can disrupt the body's natural repair processes, permitting the uncontrolled growth of cells, commonly called cancer. Very high-level exposure within a short time can be even more serious. So where else would the public turn for information about potential effects of ionizing radiation on human health? The medical officer of health for Grey Bruce Health Unit, Dr. Hazel Lynn, appeared in an ad paid for by OPG titled, A Public Health Official's Perspective on the Proposed Deep Geologic Repository. Her comments in this ad about health are as follows, quote, as a doctor and a public health officer, I know the important role that economic prosperity plays in advancing the health of both communities and individuals. By contributing to the local economy, the proposed DGR will contribute directly and indirectly to a healthy Kincardine and surrounding communities, end quote. Next, I searched the Grey Bruce Health Unit website for evidence that the public was informed about the potential health risks of the project through the public health unit venue. I did not find any information related to the proposed DGR. Astonishingly, despite the fact that Bruce County is home to the world's largest nuclear power generating station, I did not find any documents specifically related to generic risks of ionizing radiation to human health, other than advice on avoiding skin cancer from sun exposure. Just to be sure I wasn't missing anything, I reviewed the annual reports and the news releases issued by the health unit from 2002 through 2012. There are no discussions about the DGR project. The news releases are advertised in the page header as, quote, significant health-related issues and events that appear in newspapers and other media, end quote. While there are no news releases related to the proposed project, however, the potential health effects of wind turbines were discussed. Wind Turbine Public Forum, release date September 15, 2009. The Grey Bruce Health Unit will host two public forums with regard to the health issues associated with large-scale wind turbine projects. And then another report, an industrial wind turbine report, release date January 21st, 2011. The Board of Health for the Grey Bruce Health Unit wants the Government of Ontario to undertake studies into the issues identified by Grey Bruce Medical Officer of Health, Dr. Hazel Lynn, in her report reviewing potential avenues of investigation into the effects of industrial wind turbines. Troubled by these uninformative searches, I also looked for what to do in a nuclear emergency. In a 31-page document thoroughly describing what to do in the event of a tornado, electric storm, snowstorm, and the like, I found the following two paragraphs. Quote, Bruce County is home to a nuclear generating station. Although it is highly unlikely that a nuclear emergency will occur, it is best to be prepared. In Canada, responsibility for nuclear emergency preparedness and response rests with each level of government, municipal, provincial, and federal. If there is a nuclear emergency, authorities will notify the public and provide detailed instructions regarding what to do. Follow the instructions without delay, end quote. Next, I looked at the Kincardine and Saugeen Shores municipal websites for information about OPG's proposed DGR project, focusing initially on potential health effects of ionizing radiation. When there were no matches related to this subject for either municipality, I looked for any information at all about the project on these websites, excluding council minutes. Kincardine does have a DGR link that takes you to a page with PDF references to the important milestone documents of the project, as well as the presentation for the current JRP hearing, but no link to the CNSC DGR JRP page or general information about the project. Saugeen Shores, on the other hand, does not have anything on the municipal website about the DGR1 project. I specifically reviewed the Saugeen Shores Council minutes related to this proposal to see if any potential health effects were discussed with council members or our mayor during those sessions. None were listed or discussed. I used the word search function to check the remaining council minutes from 2002 through 2012, and nothing emerged. Furthermore, we know that Bruce County Council did not hear about any potential health risks to disclose to its constituents. On Monday, September 30th, 2013, Warden Ingalls of the Bruce County Council was asked at this hearing if OPG gave any presentations to the County Council about the potential health risks of the DGR project. He replied, no. In preparation for reviewing the EIS health data submissions, I reviewed the Ontario Ministry of Health and Long-Term Care Guide Health Analyst Toolkit, Winter 2012, for guidance on data analysis. In this reference for epidemiologists and other providers interpreting healthcare data, it states it is important to assess whether the data presented are appropriate for the evaluation at hand. The recommendations include checking for information gaps, spatial gaps, and temporal gaps. With this in mind, I reviewed the EIS health submissions, including comments and tables. Time does not permit a complete discussion of all the problems I noted. However, I would like to share the following illustrations. According to EIS Volume 2.1, page 242, quote, the overall health of local residents and members of Aboriginal communities are described in the next 4 sections where data are available. There is no evidence to suggest that existing health conditions would be different for Aboriginal communities than the region as a whole, in those cases when specific data are unavailable. A seasonal user may reside in the regional or local study area for only part of the year. Thus, his or her overall health would also be dependent of the physical, socioeconomic, cultural, and emotional factors of the other community in which they spend the remainder of the year. For the purpose of this assessment, it is assumed that the existing overall health of seasonal users is consistent with that of the local resident, end quote. The surprisingly naive assumption by OPG that the Aboriginal communities and seasonal residents' overall health is no different than the region as a whole is just that, an assumption. Without more specific demographic data and health statistics, there is no way to make this assertion. Because of the high percentage of seasonal residents in Saugeen Shores, 30%, and Kincardine, 20%, this flaw is significant. Even when reviewing OPG's own data, in its health conditions table, C2, period 7, period 2-1, there are several areas where it appears there is a difference in Aboriginal health compared to the Grey Bruce region. In the Aboriginal group, there is an increased incidence of obesity in females over 18, an increased incidence of asthma, and a decreased incidence of hypertension in both sexes. In section C2.7.2, health conditions, OPG states, health conditions can be indicated by body mass index, occurrence of arthritis, rheumatism, diabetes, asthma, high blood pressure, and injury hospitalization, end quote. Because cardiovascular disease, cataracts, premature aging, stroke, and immune system compromise are problems associated with radiation exposure, the conditions selected by OPG to evaluate baseline data are insufficient for the evaluation at hand. The aforementioned conditions should be included. Of note, the incidence of cardiovascular disease is significantly higher in Grey Bruce than the rest of Ontario. Furthermore, the incidence of these conditions is higher in Bruce County than in Grey County, and there are gender differences as well that are significant. This information is well documented on the Grey Bruce Health Unit website. OPG provides incomplete baseline perinatal data for risk assessment regarding potential hereditary effects from the proposed deep storage of radioactive waste. In its life expectancy table, OPG includes infant deaths. This is only one of many perinatal health indicators. Other appropriate inclusions in this category include live births, fetal deaths, congenital anomalies, small for gestational age infants, preterm births, early and late neonatal deaths, as well as fertility rates. These omissions are significant information gaps. Of interest, Ontario perinatal data was excluded from the 2008 Canadian Perinatal Health Report issued by the Canadian Perinatal Surveillance System due to concern about the validity of the Ontario data. This problem may not, even now, be fully resolved, so all perinatal data from Ontario needs to be looked at with caution. In Table C2.7.5-1, cancer incident rates in the general population, OPG has included baseline cancer statistics for health risks, but has left out the two most common cancers associated with radiation exposure, leukemia and thyroid cancer. This is inexplicable. In Table C2.7.5-2, Aboriginal Cancer Chart, the data in this chart is based on the years from 1997 to 2001. This is a different time frame what OPG used for cancer incident rates in the general population. Again, not all cancers are included, and no cancer data is listed for the Saugeen First Nations. There are many other issues with the health data as presented, including incomplete statistical analysis, lack of confidence intervals, no or incomplete stratification of data by age and gender. Information is lacking on injury rates and other health conditions in the Aboriginal population, not to mention specific rates for the Saugeen First Nations in the Grey Bruce area. Environmental and hereditary impacts preclude making assumptions that all Aboriginal groups in Canada will have the same health profile. Childhood diseases are omitted. OPG uses different reference dates to compare incident rates. You cannot compare data between groups if you are not using the same dates for all groups. These examples are just a few of the problems noted in the health data. In a dubious precedent for assessing a community's consent, the Kincardine municipal government assessed its community's willingness for hosting the DGR with a telephone poll. The issue of health was not raised in the Kincardine poll questionnaire, nor was it discussed in Saugeen Shores Council meetings when presentations or discussions about this proposed project have taken place. The hosting agreement compensation is particularly worrisome for this issue because of its influence upon a community making a decision affecting its future health. Where and when did OPG disclose to the community that a safety and health risk for the DGR cannot be quoted with certainty and give it the information it needed to make an informed decision? Regardless of the assumed safety of the proposed DGR, it is still obligatory for OPG to discuss the potential of health risks with the public. This did not happen. I have concluded from my review that the proponent has not only failed to meet the standard of informed consent by the public appropriate for an undertaking that could so significantly impact public health, but also baseline health data necessary for making informed decisions and future monitoring are inadequate or missing. The radioactive waste inventories and their hazards were not clearly identified in the public presentation materials. The EIS must identify all significant gaps in knowledge and understanding when they are relevant to key conclusions presented in the EIS. This lack of due diligence goes against the precautionary principle. These flaws are particularly concerning given the physical size and timescale of the operational and post-operational phase of the proposed project. Even if the consent process had been adequate for the citizens of Kincardine, should a community of this size be the decision maker for the 40 million people dependent on the Great Lakes for water? In conclusion, I recommend the panel reject the proposal by OPG to prepare a site, construct and operate a facility for the long-term management of low and intermediate level waste at the Bruce nuclear site within the municipality of Kincardine. Thank you.